Welcome to Far East Wargaming, and we're back this week with another Heresy Thursday. I'm Richard, your host, and once again with me is Jason.
Hello, everybody.
And this week we're doing another army review, and this week we're doing the 14th Legion, the Death Guard.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one because this is my boys. This is one of the legions that I've been playing since third edition 40K when they first got some of their legion rules, or at that time their cult rules for chaos. Yeah, very excited to talk about the Death Guard because I think they're a very straightforward yet fairly strong legion.
Yeah, in the latest edition, they've got some very strong rules, mainly because of their Legion Astartes Death Guard special rule, which allows them to be quite powerful and versatile.
Yeah, I think what they were trying to do is kind of capture the flavor of the Death Guard in the sense that they're really hard to stop and they just keep moving forward. And so the Legion rule is called Remorseless, and it's pretty straightforward. So basically, any model that does not have the cavalry or the unit subtype ignores all modifiers or restrictions on movement during the movement phase imposed by terrain or from pinning. So you can actually be pinned yet still move, but you're still subject to the effects of pinning. And you can't do another alternative form of movement such as your jump, hack, disembark, or deep strike. Now, as long as you haven't run or do anything like this, then you count as stationary. And this is what's so powerful about it. So things like your heavy weapon squads, they can move and shoot without penalty. Pinned units can move while they're pinned. Vehicles can move and still count as if they were stationary for purposes of the number of weapons that they can shoot. So it's really straightforward rule. It's not very hard to remember. It does get applied sometimes incorrectly, however, such as, people activating those alternative moves or doing a run or using this on a cavalry unit or an artillery unit, for example. And probably the last restriction of this is it does allow vehicles to ignore the effects of immobilized. Or excuse me, does not allow them to ignore the effects of immobilized, even when under the effect of this, but it does allow you to move when you are stunned. So surprisingly, although they were trying to give the feel of the remorseless advance of the Death Guard, what it does is it makes them a very mobile force, which is actually not what you would expect.
Yes, so this leads to a bias for the Death Guard to become a very shooty army, as opposed to a close combat army, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those heavy support squads in the hands of the Death Guard are absolutely terrifying because they can hide behind terrain and then pop out and shoot without penalty. The rights of war that we'll talk about in a moment encourage a lot of shooting. So yes, they do play very well as a shooting force, but don't forget about the mobility piece because a lot of models that you would normally want to keep still, whether it's vehicles or units with different subtypes or heavy weapon support squads, they can now move around a lot, which means that the Death Guard can be quite mobile.
And we have to remember that this isn't saying that they can't run, just that if they run, they don't gain a benefit from this, which kind of speaks for itself because you can't shoot when you run anyway. So all in all, I think it's a very positive one unless you're getting some run restrictions as you have in their Red of Wars.
Yes, and the other thing that I love about the Death Guard, besides all the fluff and the flavor that first drew me to them, is they tend to play very straightforward. You don't have a lot of complex interactions. You don't have a lot of scenarios to memorize and different rules effects to memorize. They're very straightforward. And this is a really straightforward Legion trait, and it's always on, which I think is another benefit. But yeah, I think it makes them very shooty, but does also make them mobile with certain units.
Yes. And their advanced reaction really helps with that. So for their advanced reaction, they have the Remorseless Advanced. And this is a advanced reaction that happens in the shooting phase. And once per game, if a unit is shot at, and they are all Legion Astartes Death Guard, that unit has the right to take a 4+ Feel No Pain against the shooting action, and they automatically pass all morale and pinning checks at the end of the shooting. Finally, once the shooting attack has been entirely resolved, the unit will make a standard movement of 7 inches, obeying all the normal rules for moving, but it doesn't penalize them in subsequent phases.
Yes, and this is a very flexible and I think a very good advanced reaction. I mean, accessing a Feel No Pain is always good. But I think the real strong part of this is the fact that you can ignore things like pinning. So if you've got an assault unit, your command squad, any of your Death Stars that you build with the Death Guard, you can pretty much make sure that they get in on a charge unless they're the subject of multiple pinning checks, right? That makes it very, very strong. Yeah, at that 7-inch move, it can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used offensively. So, for example, if you've got a charging unit in, not only do you ignore the effects of the pinning, but you can get them in closer, thus making it easier for you to charge. An example of how you could use this defensively. I mean, you get shot at by a unit, and maybe the opponent doesn't pick their most powerful shooting unit. They pick another one. You go ahead and activate this, and then at the end of that unit shooting, you get a 7-inch move that perhaps puts you behind cover, saving you from further fire. So it's a great, really, really useful reaction, and surprisingly makes the Death Guard again quite mobile. And it's always a really, really good one that you're going to use pretty much every single game, unlike perhaps some of the other advanced reactions.
I agree there. The 4+ Feel No Pain is a nice thing. Again, doesn't affect anything with instant death, so some of the larger weapons that get shot at. But it mainly is the automatically passing pinning and morale. It means they don't flee, and they can't get pinned. So, for instance, if they're getting shot at by pinning weapons and then charged by something with Spite of the Legion, really has no effect. Again, that there is situational, but it's still a very strong rule that you can use every game. There are some Legion advanced reactions that sometimes never get used.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a good one. So again, very, very straightforward, not a very complex one, pretty easy to use. I've yet to play a game where I haven't used this advanced reaction. That's always going to come in handy. Now, on the other hand, it's a little bit of a mixed bag with the Death Guard Warlord traits. And I would say out of many of the Legions, theirs are pretty meh, pretty middling. And the Death Guard tends to take more of the generic Warlord traits. I know I certainly do. But starting with the Traitor-only one, which is the very first one of the Warlord traits, this is the Reaper's Visage. Again, easy to remember. Any enemy unit with at least one model within 12 inches of a Warlord with this trait must reduce the leadership of all models in that unit by -2 whenever making a leadership test, a morale check, or attempting to regroup, unless that unit also includes at least one model with the independent character or Primarch rule. In addition, you get an advanced reaction, or excuse me, you get another additional reaction in the assault phase. Sounds good on paper. Not often does this actually get pulled off because, again, a unit with an independent character or Primarch ignores this. It specifically does not affect pinning. It doesn't affect pinning checks. It just affects leadership tests, morale checks, or attempting to regroup. I could see if you combine this with a fear-causing unit that you could use it to break units easier in charges or in close combat. But in general, this is a very situational Warlord trait, and I don't think I've played a single game with this one, to be quite honest with you, just because I don't view it as more powerful than a couple of the other traits, especially some of the generic Legion traits.
I think, honestly, that's a bit debatable. Again, I'm not a Death Guard player myself, and I can see the negative side of this Warlord trait being the assault phase extra reaction, which isn't always the most desirable one over the shooting, which I think is #1 desired for most lists. But then again, this is like having Fear 2, but in a 12-inch bubble around you. So yes, if you're going against other elites, which will invariably have some type of independent character, but breaking up just normal troop units, this has a very high chance of doing that. Now, if you're willing to put your Warlord with one of your non-elites, just because you have, for instance, Delegatus, for instance, and he comes into combat, they have a lot better chance of surviving. But yes, it's not the best per se, but I don't think it's that weak.
I don't think it's weak. I just think it's weaker than, say, I don't know, the generic shooting trait that allows you Stoic Defender, that allows you to have your weapons pin and get an extra reaction in the shooting phase. So, I mean, just to make myself clear, I don't think it's a bad Warlord trait. I just don't think it's anything super exciting, because chances are you're sticking your Warlord with a unit and you're pointing him at another tough unit. And usually you're not pointing him at just regular tac squads or things like this. And yes, it's a big bubble, so it's absolutely useful. I just don't think it's more useful than the shooting reactions, because the Warlord traits that grant shooting reactions, you're going to be doing a lot of shooting anyhow with the Death Guard. And that's why I don't rank it that high, not because it's a bad trait.
I think those are fair points. Also, you have to bear in mind the Death Guard are one of the few legions which have only one trader only special warlord trait, and the other two are both generic as opposed to a loyalist included, even though there were loyalist units at the beginning of the Heresy.
Yes, as a matter of fact, some of the most famous loyalist units at the very beginning of the Heresy were guys like Nathaniel Garrow, the Flight of the Eisenstein, bringing word of the traitors' deeds to the loyalists. So it is interesting that we don't have a specific loyalist-only trait, and instead we have two that are more neutral. The first of which is Witch Hunter. Now, this one is very situational, super situational. Against certain armies, it's going to be brutal. Against most other armies, it's not. And what it says is a warlord with this trait gains +1 to his toughness and weapon skill when locked in combat with any unit that includes at least one model with the Psyker subtype. All friendly units composed entirely of models with the Legion Astartes Death Guard special rule, and at least with a model within 12 inches of the warlord, gain a 6-up invuln against hits inflicted by psychic weapons, psychic powers, perils of the warp. In addition, you can make an additional assault phase reaction. So the reason why this one's so powerful in certain situations, if you're going up against demons, if you're going up against Thousand Suns, if you're going up against word bearers, if your meta has a lot of people that like to take librarians, powerful, very powerful. That +1 toughness in hand-to-hand basically does affect the instant death threshold. So you're not going to get instant death by power fists and thunderhammers when you're going against those kinds of foes. But against the vast majority of other legions, you're never going to use this. You're not going to use it against Mechanica. You're not going to use it against a lot of militia armies unless they're bringing psychers. You're not going to use it against knights and custodies. So yes, I think if you're list tailoring or you're playing in a meta that features these kinds of armies and these kinds of forces, then it's a good one. But again, I'd say 90% of the time you're not going to take it just because it won't trigger. Right.
I can agree with that wholeheartedly. The +1 toughness against psychers means that their force weapons and such are, and you're not going to get doubled out from toughness, instant death here. And the thing I like about this Witch Hunter is it's very Death Guard thematic, because Mortarion hated psychers, and this really epitomizes that. Again, situational in its use. You would only use it against Thousand Suns or demons, as you say. It has no benefit against anyone else, but still very fluffy.
Very, very fluffy. And nothing wrong with taking fluffy choices, don't get me wrong. Again, it's just situational. But you're right, it does kind of capture the spirit of things. And I think the other neutral warlord trait that we do have available is one that I have played before, and this one's called the Blood of Barbarous. And the way this one reads is any hits with Rending X, Murderous Strike X, Poison X, or Flesh Bane allocated to the Warlord or any model in the unit that he joins, they only gain the benefit of those rolls on a d6 of 6. So what's very important is they don't include breaching in this list. So for some reason, breaching hits are not affected, but rending hits are. This can be strong. I mean, again, if you're going against a lot of units or opponents that have a lot of Murderous Strike, Rending, Poison, Fleshbane, you're going to be able to get a lot of use out of this. It just makes your Warlord and the unit that he's with that much harder to kill. And I think that's a good thing. You do also get an additional reaction in the shooting phase, which is also very powerful. And I think together those two things make this one of the reasons why, or two of the reasons why I actually take this Warlord trait on occasion if I know that I'm running into those kinds of opponents. You know, again, being able to modify all those special rules to a 6-up only, especially something like Fleshbane, which normally only affects you on a 2-up. Now it's only affecting you on a 6. I mean, you're really reducing people's damage potential. So I like this one a lot. I have played with this one. But again, it's not going to be in use against all armies and all legions, especially depending on your meta.
Again, in agreement there with you. I like this, the Blood of Barbarous, especially if you're going up against things like the Raven Guard with their Raven Talons. There's rending 5-ups on their Raven Claws. They're deadly there. Pushing them to 6-up, still deadly, but much less so than the 5-up they naturally get, so could sway the battle in close combat with your key Warlord unit and his retinue or elites against the opposing elites there. So I do like it, but in general, the rending one, I think, and poison and fleshbane are the ones that come up. I've very few weapons have murder strike other than a 6, so that one there is also very situational.
Yep, totally agree. And again, I think I find myself taking generic warlord traits more often than these. Not because, again, any of these are so bad or anything like that. They're all usable. They're all perfectly usable. It's just all of them seem to be very situational. And that's what kind of steers me towards generic warlord traits, especially Stoic Defender, much more often. But I think it's a little bit of a different story with the Rites of War. And the Death Guard have two powerful Rites of War. Both of them have changed since 1.0, and both of them are now quite good, in my opinion. Starting with the first one, the Reaping, and this one has changed. So the effects of this is veteran squads can be chosen as troop choices. Note, it doesn't say compulsory troop choices, and it does not give them line. Heavy support squads can be taken as non-compulsory troop choices. Also does not give them line. Any model chosen as a part of this detachment with the Legion of Astartes Death Guard and the character subtype, so that includes your sergeants, right, may be given rad grenades for 10 points. Rad grenades are awesome. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people take this. The fact that every single one of your sergeants, if you want to, can get access to rad grenades makes them very good, makes them much more dangerous in a close combat. Taking heavy support squads and moving them over to troops is another big reason why people take this, because it frees up the heavy support slots for more things like Leviathans, tanks, Derrideos. Very, 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 very strong. And I think the limitations on this are a bit tricky, and you need to plan accordingly. So the first limitation is models taken as part of this detachment may not make run moves or any reaction that allows them to make a move, with the exception of the remorseless advanced reaction, which is our advanced reaction. Not being able to run is brutal, especially in Zone Mortalis or any big open tables. I mean, you're really going to have to plan accordingly for this. And what I mean is you need access to vehicles. Rhinos are going to be your best friends. You don't want a lot of foot slogging with this, or you're going to be very, very slow. Because the second limitation is you cannot do a deep strike assault, you cannot do a subterranean assault, and you cannot do a flanking assault. This also limits your mobility quite a lot. So definitely transports are going to be your best friend. You need that mobility. You need to be able to get to the other side of the table. You need to be able to access the objectives as necessary. But some very, very strong effects in this particular Rite of War, and it makes it a very popular choice.
I can definitely see how this is a popular choice, and you're right, the not being able to run your troops can be detrimental, but I see this very much as the epitome of a gun line Rite of War, where you're taking multiple heavy support choices, culverins, las cannons, missile launchers, things like this, even heavy bolters just in general, and you're using them as the core of your force. And then, yes, since none of those are scoring, you've got a few scoring line units that you're putting in transports, trying to safely get up the field. But in general, with that much firepower behind them, there's other targets of opportunity for the opponent.
Yes, and I think the rad grenades too. I mean, don't forget that the rad grenades almost encourage you to also have some assault capabilities, because you can get more of the units that have access to those. Very, very nice choice. Very, very good Rite of War. But I actually think the second Rite of War, Creeping Death, is even stronger, and I'll explain why in just a minute. In 1.0, the Creeping Death was very limited in its effects. So it usually only affected things like forest templates in terms of turning them into mush and turning them into mire. But they've changed that now for 2.0. So the effects are all models in the detachment with the Legion of Astartes Death Guard automatically pass any dangerous terrain checks. So this is great. Don't forget, this can affect things like bikes. It can affect a lot of models because it doesn't say specifically any restrictions other than the fact that they must have Legion of Astartes Death Guard. All models in the deployment zone of this detachment gain a 6-up Shrouded. Again, not game breaking, but your entire army basically starting the game with a 6-up Shroud is nice. It's very, very nice. And even nicer, your entire deployment zone counts as difficult and dangerous terrain. All zones of area terrain on the battlefield, which includes jungles, woods, and ruins, which is new, are counted as dangerous terrain, and in a detachment with this Rite of War, Grave Wardens can be taken as non-compulsory troop choices, so that once again fills up more of your heavy support slots for use on other things. This Rite of War can be absolutely nasty. And before I talk about that, let me just really quickly talk about the limitations. It can only be used by traders, and you must include, and this is an HQ tax, you must include a Centurion, Cataphractii Centurion, or Tartar Centurion with a Siegebreaker Legion console upgrade, which is actually really good because it gives units thunder. Where this Rite of War gets absolutely brutal, so much of the table is going to be difficult and dangerous terrain. So much of it. Ruins, your opponent moving through ruins is going to trigger lots of dangerous terrain checks. Your opponent outflanking or drop potting into your deployment zone or different kinds of things, difficult and dangerous terrain. You get a free Shroud, awesome benefit. I've played this Rite of War in combination with a lot of things that have grav to drop even more difficult and dangerous terrain templates onto the table. You can absolutely pin somebody into their deployment zone. And one example I have is I played a game against Paul, our buddy Paul, who's been here on the channel, against his Imperial Fists. We were playing corner deployments. I was able to essentially hold him into his deployment zone for the first couple of turns. He couldn't get out just because of the combination of the various effects of the ruins and the grav templates. Very, very strong, much improved from 1.0, and I find myself playing this particular Rite of War actually more often than the Reaping. Just because I don't typically run, 4 heavy support squads or anything like this, so I really don't need the benefits of the Reaping. I like this one a lot better because it really, really slows down the enemy and really, really can allow you to create choke points and stuff like that.
Yeah, the board control you get with the Creeping Death does allow you kind of to dictate the flow of the battle here, especially if you're using things to hem in. And there are some missions where it is about board control and getting into certain areas, and denying them access to your own deployment zone makes you think about those deep strikes into the back line or the flanking assaults trying to come up behind you there. You're really, I don't know, protecting the back of your troops without having to sacrifice any units covering it. So it is a powerful one. Again, it's trader only. Not really a big problem for Death Guard. I know you designed your force as a loyalist Death Guard force, but you've played both ways for here. And again, the HQ tax isn't as big as it really sounds here, because the Siegebreaker is actually a pretty decent console to have.
Yeah, I completely agree with all points. I do like this Rite of War a lot. I do think it's very fluffy, very thematic. If you think about the Death Guard plotting forward under the cover of Alchem munitions and nasty fog and stuff like this, it's also a very flavorful choice. It can be a bit OP and a bit oppressive if you combine it with too much other stuff. So don't go spamming, 15 grav guns, although you could do that if you want, because remember, you can move and shoot them because of our Legion rule. It can be pretty nasty if you go overboard on it, but it's a nice fluffy choice, and I like it a lot.
Well, that actually segues quite well into the armory section for the Death Guard, because the first thing in the armory for the Death Guard is their Alchem munitions. So, well, Jason, what exactly are the Alchem munitions, and how are they different from normal munitions for Flamers?
Yeah, the fluff on Alchem munitions is basically it's nastier types of Flamer weapons, whether that's chemical, biological, or they just upped the strength, however you want to describe it. They're just a nasty version of Flamer weapons. And the Death Guard in particular and the fluff have a lot of these because of the destructive power and kind of the theme of the Legion. But basically what happens is you can exchange hand flamer, heavy flamer, flamestorm cannon. You can basically exchange almost any single template type weapon, flamer type weapon, for an Alchem weapon. And what all of these have in common is in return, you get Fleshbane, which is always nice, wounding everything on a 2 with hand flamers in particular, which are normally only strength 3. Guys with hand flamers can get wounding on a 2, anything. Now, the downside is everything gets hot. So you're going to have to expect that you're going to lose a few guys if you spam these things. But tactical support squads, all with Alchem flamers, nasty. I don't recommend taking 10 because, number one, it's hard to get 10 templates down. But if you take 10, you have more chances of it gets hot. But if you take a squad of, say, 5 to 8, they're going to be wounding everything on a 2-up. Even more nasty, destroyers with dual hand flamers. or combi flamers, or even sticking hand flamers on your characters. All of those things can exchange for these kinds of weapons for absolutely free. And you get the access to the Fleshbane. And I think that's what makes these so strong. I've seen one example of a destroyer squad where they equipped almost every single person with dual hand flamers, and they were dropping something like 120 wounds on a unit because of how many templates and because of the Fleshbane. It's really, really nasty, and I think it's a nice, flavorful little choice. Again, not game breaking. It is flamer templates. You do have to get close, but boy, does it up their damage a lot.
Yeah, the Fleshbane here I think is the key, and the Gets Hot is a rightful downside, but I don't think it's as bad as everyone thinks. The main deficit of this is that it is all flamer templates, so the limited range of 8 inches basically, and the limited scope of how flamers can be used means you can't be talking about big units using this because it'd be hard to deploy them. A 5-man unit is simple enough to put in a line to get the most out of flamers, but when you're getting to 10-man, looking at basically 2 ranks, the second rank is redundant, and therefore in case the first rank dies, so you still have a chance. Deep striking destroyers, a 5-man squad of destroyers into the back. That there is great, but you have to bear in mind one of their Rite of Wars just prohibits that from happening totally.
Yes, it does. Absolutely correct. So it's going to be more of the destroyers that are on foot or in a rhino, something like this, or with jump packs. Combi weapons. Remember, flamers as a minor, combi flamers as a minor combi weapon. You can actually reuse those as much as you want. So these are great value and gives you a good reason why you want to take combi flamers. Even mixing a couple of them into a vet squad definitely ups their damage output. I think the next two, because we have a very limited amount of armory choices in the Death Guard, the next two are actually pretty straightforward. So the first one is Toxin Bombs. Any model with the character subtype Legion Astartes Special Rule, Death Guard, and Traitor Allegiance can take Toxin Bombs for 10 points. And what these do is when an enemy unit declares a charge on a unit carrying these, every model in the enemy unit has to roll a d6. On a roll of a 1, they suffer a wound with no armor save, cover save, or damage mitigation allowed. You can only take invulns. Sounds really strong on paper, and these can be a little bit of a trap. But remember, a squad of 6 guys, odds are only one is going to come up, and they still get an invuln. You can't count on these things to do a lot of damage, and I've seen some people that spam these all over the place. I don't think that's good value. I think if you've got a couple units that you know are going to get stuck in, or you have a couple units that you really need to try and discourage people from charging, it's okay to add these, but don't spam them because those points do add up really quick. And I think if you're going to spam anything, spam rad grenades in the reaping, and save these for more special choices, a little bit more rare.
Yes, I was going to say the very same thing about toxin bombs over rad grenades, and I think rad grenades are a lot more useful, even though, again, it's in the first turn only. This is a one-use, well, it's not a one-use, but I'm saying this is a situational effect, and you're still rolling d6s for this, and on ones. I don't know, it's not going to be taking out the 2 wound models that you kind of really want to take out with this kind of effect. It's more targeting tactical squads and the more line units. So definitely not something I would spend money on as a Death Guard player, unless really there was 10 points to spare somewhere and you're putting it in one of your close combat, or I know a unit you want to protect a bit more.
Yep, completely agree. Good choice, fluffy choice. Not a must-have, and definitely don't spam it. The other last piece of our armory is power sights, and we had these obviously in 1.0. They have changed a little bit in 2.0. They are now a strength +2 AP3 weapon. They're melee. They're two-handed, so important. You don't get a bonus for attacks. You do have rending 6 up, which is okay. It's not great on, say, a single sergeant because of the two-handed. He's only going to get usually 2 or 3 attacks. Does have Reaping Blow 1, which does give him a bonus if he's in base-to-base with more enemy units. It's a fluffy choice. It's a great choice, but it really is only going to be semi-strong when you're spamming them, such as, Death Shrouds who come with them by default, a unit of veterans that can put multiple scythes. It's very cool, very thematic. It's not OP, and I think it's a really, really good choice. And I mix a few of these in just for the heck of it because it's so Death Guard. But it's not going to be your mass killing machines just because one of your sergeant has one of these.
I agree. I think you need to be using these en masse, and it's really for the armor value three. Sorry, the save 3+ save units because of the AP3. Going against artificer or terminators here, it really does suffer from the fact that it is only AP3, and even the rending 6+ helps. It's not a murderous strike weapon, so it's not taking out 2 wound models. You're relying against terminators or other elite units getting those 6s in to cause automatic wounds here. Even though strength 6 is hitting on 2s, they're still getting a decent number of saves. And if you have too many of these, Reaping Blow doesn't come into play because you actually have to be in base to base with more than one. And on a sergeant, in a challenge against a power fist, this is like putting a more powerful power sword against a power fist here. You have a chance of rending on a 6, but if you don't, you're dead.
Yes, and I think if you were going to take a power weapon, because there's no cost to actually take these as long as you have a power weapon. If you're going to take a power sword, you do get the bonus of the extra attack with a bolt pistol, but I mean, there's not a point cost to the sight, so it's not necessarily a bad choice. But your point exactly, you're going to die to fists. You're going to die to pretty much anything before you really can count on getting that rending through. So yeah, fluffy choice. I like it. Put them in for theme, but you're going to have to use a lot of them to really get the effect.
So that covers the armory for the Death Guard. It was not very long, but there's still some powerful stuff there. Let's move on to the Primarch of the Death Guard, Mortarion, the Pale King, the Master of the Death Guard, the Traveler, Dread Liberator of Barbarous, the Poisoner himself.
Yes, and he's a good one. He's a bit on the high side as far as points go, so 425 points. He comes with the War Gear of the Barbarian Plate, which basically gives you a 2-up, 4++ invuln. Silence, which is a nice little shooting weapon, which unfortunately you probably won't use as often. The Lantern, Silence is his scythe. The Lantern is his shooting weapon. Silence is the scythe. It's a little bit stronger scythe. For some reason, he comes with 7 Phosphex bombs, even though you probably will never have a game where you can throw all 7 of them, and frag grenades. And his special rules are pretty standard for a Trimarch. What is different is he has an will not die of a 4-up instead of a 5-up. Fear 2, Adamantium Will 3, Hatred Psychers, and then he has a couple special rules: Shadow of the Reaper, Preternatural Resistance, and then his Resilience, and then his Warlord traded Sire of the Death Guard. And this is a pretty good one because it's a buffing, and it's a buffing for almost the entire army. Friendly units composed entirely of models with Legion Astartes Death Guard, including Mortarion, ignore all penalties to their leadership caused by fear and shell shock, so it makes them a little bit harder to break. And what makes them very hard to break is if they're locked in combat, they suffer no penalty to their leadership characteristics due to casualties. So you have kind of a semi-stubborn available to you for everybody, almost everybody in the army. And then you can make an additional reaction in the opponent's assault phase as long as he hasn't been removed. Very, very nice little package. He also has 7 wounds, which is higher than a lot of Primarchs, which only have 6. He comes with a base 6 attacks, movement 7, weapon skill 7. Pretty nice. But where he gets very nice is in his special rules. And this is why I say you're not going to probably shoot with him too often. So Shadow of the Reaper is almost identical to what it was in 1.0. And what it basically says is, as long as he's not embarked, in reserves, locked in combat, or in a retinue. And retinue is a little bit of the downside. You can't really stick him with stuff. In the player's shooting phase, instead of making a shooting attack, you can be redeployed. You can be redeployed basically up to 10 inches as long as you're not within 3 inches of an enemy model. You're not placed in impassable terrain, a vehicle, or a building. It doesn't count as a move, which means you can actually still charge, but it's a disordered charge. What makes this so powerful is he already has a movement of 7. So you do the movement of 7, then you do this little 10-inch shadow move, so you're at 17. And then you can pull off a charge. Obviously, your box cars is hard, but you theoretically have a 29-inch threat range turn 1. That's ugly. And if an opponent is not very, very smart, he can get caught in a turn one charge very easily by Mortarion. Again, the downside is you can't stick in stuff, whether it's a retinue or a vehicle. And I understand why they did that. They did it for balancing purposes. But if you're not careful, a crafty, shooty opponent can actually kill him on turn one if he's not with a retinue. But it's going to take a lot of shooting to do it. Very fluffy, very powerful. He can be in the enemy's lines really, really, really quick. And then once he gets there, he's going to do a lot of damage because preternatural resilience. He Poisoned X, Rending X, Fleshbane, they only do on a d6 roll of a 6, so it's kind of like the Warlord trait. And then Silence, his Scythe, is +1 strength, so strength 8, instant killing most things. AP 2 by default. Instant death, just in case you needed that on a strength 8 weapon. Sunder, so nasty against vehicles. Two-handed, and he has Reaping Blow 2. So technically on the charge, as long as it's not disordered, he could get as many as 9 attacks on the charge with this thing. Absolutely nasty. He can cleave through vehicle or infantry alike.
Yes, he's a very powerful Primarch if you play him right. I think that's the key here. His Sire of the Death Guard there is really a force multiplier. The modification to the way leaderships are done there without requiring line of sight, just him being part of the force is a big part of them. And, well, as much as I like Shadow of the Reaper, I'd only use it against certain forces, because if I was going up against something like, well, let's say the Empress Children's Sun Killers, having Mortarion out on his own, if there was a unit of 10 out there, is playing with fire, because it's hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s, and you're getting your 4-up save there, and you only have 7 wounds.
I agree with you. You're not going to use it all the time, or even if you are going to use it, you're going to have to make sure to keep him probably in cover T1, maybe T2, just depending. It does encourage a very aggressive play style, and it makes Mortarion a very nasty distraction Carnifex. I hear you. I think there's definitely going to be times where you got to be careful and you don't just feel like he's so invulnerable, because he's not. Primarchs are actually a bit easier to kill in 2.0 than they were in 1.0. And yes, just be smart with him, but it can pull off some very, very nasty tricks. And this is why I say you're not going to shoot. You're not going to throw your Phosphex bombs in most cases instead of doing your Shadow of the Reaper. The Lantern, his weapon, it's a plasma type weapon. It's 18-inch, strength 8, AP 2 with Sunder, assault 1. So it is pretty nasty against vehicles and can instant kill Terminators and things like that. But I'd say roughly 3/4 of the time, you're probably going to be using Shadow of the Reaper, and you're not going to be able to get these shots off. But you do have flexibility, and not all Primarchs have good shooting attacks. So this is welcome in Mortarion, where it does allow you to play them in different ways.
Yeah. I would be very careful with Mortarion going up against one of the close combat focused Primarchs, because he's likely to suffer there against them, even though he has 6 attacks base here. The weapon skill 7 is 1 less than the focused combat ones. And him being all alone and vulnerable, he's got the mobility, but if he charged a line with a combat Primarch in the first turn, I don't think he'd be around in the second turn.
I agree with you, or he'd be heavily wounded. I definitely, you don't throw him at most enemy Primarchs. Completely agree. What he's going to do very, very well is decimate pretty much everything else. Mm-hmm. But yes, a Leman Russ will eat him for lunch. A Horus Ascended will eat him for lunch. A Fulgrim will eat him for lunch. He just doesn't have the ability, I think, to go toe-to-toe with those guys, but he can handle pretty much anything else.
Yeah, as long as you can skirt on the outskirts, basically his 17-inch movement can put him around, and he can fleet around the field, taking out smaller units on his own in rounds. But if he ever gets caught, I think he'd be in trouble.
Agree. And I think probably just the last thing to briefly mention is his Shadow of the Reaper doesn't say that he can't actually go through walls. Zone Mortalis, anybody? All it says is that he has to move to 10 inches from his original position. And again, following the restrictions about enemy models and passable terrain, it doesn't say that you cannot go through the terrain. And in fact, it says it the opposite. The intervening terrain does not affect him in any way. So if you're playing against Mortarion and Zone Mortalis, it'll be kind of a high points level game, obviously. And he can't go everywhere, but he can get through a lot of passageways and doorways that normally a Primarch on his size base could not. So just be aware of that as well.
Well, then let's talk about his retinue, the Death Shroud Terminators, the ones that you would put with Mortarion if you weren't going to take advantage of his Shadow of the Reaper there. They're quite unique.
They're quite unique and they're very strong, but they're also super expensive. So for 140 points, which is the cost of, well, a lot of things, you only get 2 Death Shroud. They come stock with an Alchem pistol, which is, the flamer pistol, basically a power scythe. They come in Tartarus armor, not Cataphracti, so this is a bit of a downside. You can sweep, you can run, but you cannot actually get a 4-up. You can only get the 5-up, and if you're playing the Reaping, you can't even run. You also get a few special rules, the standard ones about Relentless. He can be taken as Death Shroud Retinue, which is pretty common for most elite Legion Terminators. Battle Hardened 1, so that means you can't be instant killed by Power Fists and Thunderhammers, which is nice. Stubborn and Chosen Warriors. Additional Death Shrouds are 70 points, and the only upgrade you can take is Melt the Bombs for 5 points each, which I think are a good value. Grenade Harness for 10 points. 70 points each is a lot, but you do get a few other nice little things. So Weapon Skill 5, great. Ballistic Skill 5, doesn't matter. I mean, you have a template Flamer pistol, doesn't matter. 3 wounds each, and most Legion Terminators or Retinues are only 2 wounds. 3 attacks on every single guy, and Leadership 9 Stubborn. So you get a lot for those points, but where people kind of run into a trap is figuring that these things are indestructible, and they're actually not. Yes, you can be instant killed. You cannot be instant killed, actually, by Strength 8, but that doesn't mean that you can't easily lose wounds due to only having a 5-up invul. Very easy to lose a lot of wounds against stuff that goes through AP2. I've done it before, where my guys have just been destroyed by like fire drakes or other things. Power Scythe, as we talked about before, it only triggers on a 6, the rending. Even if you're running a squad of 5 of these guys, which is 350 points, 375 if you give them Melta Bombs, you're still not going to be sneaking a lot of 6s through. What they're great at is being durable. And what they're great at is actually catching the opponent's attention. He can't ignore them because if they get into contact with just regular stuff, they're gonna kill it. But don't expect these things to go toe-to-toe with most other Legion elite choices because they cannot hang due to the weapons and the lower invul.
I think that really sums them up quite well there. The fact being that they just don't have the killing capability of taking out 2+ save models because they're relying on the rending. And yes, Battle Hardened with 3 wounds gets rid of some of the instant death, mainly due to the Strength 8 toughness, but it doesn't get rid of Murderous Strike, so Murderous Strike still kills. And there's a lot of Murderous Strike weapons out in the elite units of most forces. We're talking about Power on Blade, Emperor's Children have several. There are other legions with Murderous Strike in their elites. The weapon skill 5 is nice. I think it's kind of mandatory for 1, a retinue, and 2, for just a Terminator elite. The ballistic skill 5 is kind of redundant because of the fact that they're flamers and they don't require any rolls on the ballistic skill to hit. And then, well, bulky 2, and the biggest downside for me is their 5+. Anything in Tartarus armor is going to be suffering, even with 3 wounds, against Cataphracti with Power Fists, Chain Fists, and such.
Or Contemptors. I mean, Contemptors are actually bad news for these guys because of the 5-up and the Brutal 3. It's very easy, and I've done this many a time, it's very easy for a single Death Shroud to fail all 3 of the Brutal 3 saves on a 5-up. It's very easy. The points cost too, I mean, it adds up so quick. You could take these in a unit of 10 if you wanted to, if you're crazy enough to spend 700 points on a single unit. I find myself actually using these when I do use them instead of a regular command squad. I find myself taking them in units of 4 with a HQ choice as the retinue. I don't typically go too much more than that just because the points just get really, really out of control. And if you do take them as a retinue, you do get access to a Legion Standard, which is great to make a scoring unit. So that's another option as well. Or if you want to take, a very small unit, You can do different things with them, but again, yeah, you don't go against the heavy hitters with these guys. You will lose.
Well, moving on from the first Terminator choice for the Death card, they do have a second Terminator option, which is rare for most legions here, and it's moving from elites to heavy supports. So the Grave Warden Terminators, 250 points for 5, and arguably more useful than the Death Shroud.
Yes, I use these a lot more often than the Death Shroud, that's for sure. The only downside I think is there's two downsides, but I'll talk about the strengths and the rules first. They don't have weapon skill 5. They have a 4. Pretty standard Terminator stat line. Leadership 8, 9 on the Chem Master. For their war gear, they come with their assault grenade launcher, power fist, death cloud projector, and cataphracti armor. Their special rules, standard, relentless, bulky for Terminators. They do have Shrouded in Death, firing protocols 2, which is very interesting. You can fire 2 different weapons. They come with a standard Shrouded 6, which is great. And then they're stubborn. All great things. You can take extra Grave Wardens, up to 5 of them at 45 points. You can exchange your Power Fist for a Chain Fist for a very cheap 5 points. You can give one guy an Alchem Flamer for 5 points. You can exchange your grenade launchers for combi bolters, although I don't think I would ever do that. You can do the combi weapons. I don't think I would ever do that either. You can give a power scythe on the Chem Master, I guess, if you wanted an initiative weapon, and you can take a grenade harness. The downside of these is that they're in the heavy support slot. They're weapon skill 4, and in a Death Guard list, which tends to emphasize a lot of shooting, you're giving up something else really good in the heavy support choice to get them. Even if you take more than 5, your only dedicated transport option is a Proteus. So if you want to use a bigger unit of these, you're still going to have to spring for a Spartan, which is also in the heavy support choice slot. Those are the weaknesses of this unit. Now, what they do really, really good is mulch a lot of basic guys and probably basic Terminators. They don't mulch elites. You don't point them at elites. Their shooting weapon, that grenade launcher, it comes with 2 profiles, crack, and they call it toxin, but it's basically a frag, both 18-inch. Crack is strength 6, AP4. Toxin is strength 1, AP5. Crack is assault 2, but the toxin rounds are AP4, poison 3, and ignore cover. So they got rid of the templates, which I think was great because it took forever to resolve the shooting of these guys. And then their Death Cloud projector, which, don't forget, you can actually do firing protocols 2, and you can use this as well. It's a template weapon. Strength 1, AP4, assault 1, poison 3 up. So nice. You get a lot of shooting in a very compact package, but most of it is very short range. Shrouded in Death is also really, really good because all charges against them are considered to be disordered unless the enemy has some sort of special rule that ignores that. Great unit. Really, really nice. I struggle a little bit with taking them in more than 5 because you're having to buy the Spartan and you're not saving any of your heavy support slots. But I think a unit of 5 is great. I think a unit of 5 and then sticking a character with them is great. I don't recommend foot slogging them because they don't have battle hardened. And the Shrouded 6 is only going to save you not quite often, to be honest with you. But yeah, overall a very, very good choice. And at 250 points for 5 is not much of a premium to actually pay over regular Terminators.
Yeah, for me, I'm on the fence with these guys. I like them. I liked them in the old edition because of the just volume of fire you got with the templates. But now they've moved away from the templates. Their range to me is just too short at 18. It does mean you're getting 1 round of shooting off before a elite unit is coming at you to charge at 18-inch range. Is very doable there. Yes, they are taking a lot of fire, not as much as they did in the past, due to the templates were arguable there. Assault 4 as opposed to, I think it used to be 3 frag templates, 3 small templates each. Yes, it took a long time to do, so this is streamlining how you use them. But I think they've become, in my opinion, a bit weaker than in Heresy 1.0 there. The Shrouded in Death, meaning you're getting disordered, so you're losing the extra attack on the charge, does help them. But the biggest downside with any Legion specific Terminator squad is not having weapon skill 5. That there is the biggest difference here. And I don't think the weapons options they've been given, in my opinion, outweighs not being able to deal damage in close combat to what they'll inevitably be at 18-inch range.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't use these as often as I was in 1.0. And again, I don't run the bigger squads of them. I run no more than 5. It's a very, very fluffy choice. Zone Mortalis is a different story. These guys shine in Zone Mortalis because of all the weapons that they can use and the shorter ranges anyhow. But yes, I agree with you. They're not quite as killy as they used to be. Um, but I understand why they did it, because resolving all those templates took forever. Uh, but yeah, nice choice, fluffy choice, and to your point earlier, the Death Guard are one of the few legions that have access to multiple Terminators. So you could theoretically, with a Pride of the Legion list, and you could put a lot of Terminators on the board if you wanted to of the various flavors. So that's pretty cool.
Well, moving on from the Liber Hereticus troops and heavy supports there to the HQ, there's only one in the book, and that's Calas Typhon.
Yeah, Typhon is really, really good. So he's changed a bit from 1.0 as well. But running through him real quick, he's 200 points. He has pretty much a Praetor style stat line. He has 4 attacks, 4 wounds, pretty standard. Leadership 10. It's a leadership 10 stubborn, which is really, really nice. His war gear, he comes with an Alchem flamer pistol, Lacrimae, which is his version of a scythe, grenade harness, death cloud projector, rad grenades, which is really, really nice. Cataphractine armor. And for his special rules, he gets some good ones. Relentless, Stubborn, Bulky 2, Witch Blood, Shrouded in Death, which is the one that forces disordered charges. Firing Protocols 2, which means he can fire 2 weapons. Shrouded 6-up Traitor, and then his Warlord trait is Comes the Reaper. So for Comes the Reaper, what that basically says is any attack is part of a shooting attack or during the assault phase, which has the poison special rule. So this would be things like your flamers. This would be your toxin grenade launchers. This would be your death cloud projectors. Any unit that has a unit within a model at least with 6 inches of Calas Typhon increases the poison by 1. So now all of a sudden your poison goes usually from a 3-up to a 2-up. So the equivalent of Fleshbane, which is really, really nice. And anything that does have Fleshbane, you can re-roll failed to wound rolls. So this makes your template weapons just particularly deadly. And you can build a lot of lists around this ability, right? Lots of Grave Wardens, all of a sudden their output goes up a bit more. Anything with templates, you're going to get a lot of usage out of it. You do get an additional reaction in the movement phase, which I think is a bit blah. Because remember, with the Reaping Rite of War, you can't do reactions in the movement phase. So Calas Typhon, well, you can do Interceptor, but you couldn't do something like, retreating or moving forward, etc. Yeah, it's that part's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think the effect he has on weapons is really, really cool, and that's a really, really good part of the Warlord trait.
Yeah, I see Calas himself more coming in not the reaping right of war, but the creeping death there. Because just putting down more death, restricting the other side, even though they're relatively restricted in Cataphracti armor. If you're putting them with Grave Wardens, you've got a lot more control of the board, and this is controlling it as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the few examples, as we'll talk about in just a second, of synergy, big synergy, because you see with certain other legions, like we were talking about the Emperor's Children before, for example, a lot of other legions, their rules stack upon rules, stack upon rules, and you get a lot of synergy. Typhon has that effect as well. So it's not just his Warlord trait, but if we look at his other stuff, so Lacrimae is his Scythe. It's Strength +2, AP2, which is nice because it bumps up from AP3 to AP2. Two-handed Reaping Blow 1 Fleshbane. So you're strike 6. You're wounding most things on a 2 anyhow, but against some of the tougher opponents, the Fleshbane is really going to help you. Death Cloud Projectors, Shrouded in Death, we talked about those. Witch Blood, he has the Witch Sense Psychic Power and the Toxin Cloud Psychic Weapon. These are really, really nice. Let's talk about the Witch Sense Psychic Power, and this is what turns Typhon really, 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 really nasty. This psychic power says at the start of any assault phase, Typhon's controlling player can make a psychic check. If it is passed, then his weapon skill goes by +1 and his attacks go up by D3. Craziness. All of a sudden, he's weapon skill 7. If it's on the chart, then you roll a 5 or 6 on your D3 roll. He's got 8 attacks at weapon skill 7, strength 6, wounding almost everything in the game at a 2. And it's all AP2 at initiative. That's really, really, really ugly. So he could theoretically smash through an entire unit of 5 Terminators, because don't forget, he has rad grenades as well. So all those attacks, strength 6 versus now T3, AP2, He's really, really nasty. And it's not just on the charge either, because remember it says that's any assault phase. So even if he's stuck in already, you can keep activating this every turn, every turn, every turn. Um, Really, really nice, and it ups him quite a lot and makes him really, really good. And I've seen a lot of players are actually using him now. Before he was a bit more of a situational choice, but now I see a lot of Death Guard players taking Typhon. I'm gonna have to start doing it, I guess, but I mostly play Loyalist when I can. And then his Toxin Cloud Psychic Weapon. Uh, you're not usually going to do this in place of your regular attacks, but if you decided to, um, it's a 24-inch range, strength 1, 4, assault 1, large blast 5, fleshbane, pinning, psychic focus. Uh, you can shoot it off to hopefully pin the unit before you charge in, so that part of it is great, and it is a large blast, a large pipe plate. Um, all in all, a really, really nice package. I would say that as far as special characters go, at 200 points for everything that he can do, that's a bargain. Because a tricked out Praetor is going to, in Cataphracta armor, by the time you add similar stuff to him, is going to cost you some pretty close points. So it's a really good choice to take Typhon.
Yeah, I think it comes down to his psychic powers there, Witch Sense mainly. Getting weapon skill 7 really pushes you above. The one difference in weapon skill makes a drastic difference in close combat here. The D3 attacks is nice, and I know at leadership 10, the perils of the warp is honestly negligible here. What I find quite strange is the fact that Calas Typhon is a psyker in a Death Guard army, going really against everything that Mortarion was for here, being one of their first captains.
Yeah, if you actually dig into the lore a bit and read the various books for 30K connected to the Death Guard, it does explain kind of all about Typhon. Typhon was actually one of Mortarion's early buddies when Mortarion landed on Barbarous and started fighting against the overlords of that planet. And even then, he had repressed psychic powers. So he was actually one of the few. I won't say too much more than that because if I do, I'll be giving away tremendous spoilers to a bunch of the books. But yes, he was one of the few psychers in the Death Guard, and he actually repressed those because he knew that Mortarion just wasn't having it. But yes, he's a really, really, really good character, and I guess the only weakness that I can see for him is he doesn't have battle hardened, so it doesn't mean that he's indestructible. He's still only a T4 guy, so just be wary if you don't kill stuff and it's strength 8, it's going to have a good chance to kill you in return.
Yes, don't go up against a Contemptor.
No, no, unless you have a lot of ablative wounds with you.
Well, that's everything in the Liber Hereticus for the Death Guard. So honestly, not that much there, but they do have a few auxiliary units. Should we start with the first one that was released in the Legacy Exemplar Battle units?
Yeah, so from the exemplary battles for 30K, we did get an extra unit, and this unit is called the Death Guard Mortis Poisoner Squad. And for 115 points, you get 5 guys. The sergeant equivalent is called a poison master. They're kind of like if a tack squad and a destroyer squad had a baby, and it wasn't quite good. Now, what I mean by that is their stat line is pretty much a tactical Marine stat line. They don't have 2 wounds. They only have 1 attack base, except for on the sergeant equivalent. They have leadership 7, 8, 3 up saves. Their special rules are kind of similar to destroyers in the fact that they get stubborn, counterattack 1, bitter duty. Their war gear, they come with bolters, bolt pistols, frag crack, rad grenades at standard, which is nice, power armor. You could take up to another 10, so those are only 15 points apiece, which isn't too terribly expensive. You can give them a termite or a land raider or a rhino as a dedicated transport, so that's particularly nice. Chain swords, bayonets, chain bayonets. You can give any model an Alchem flamer for free, exchanging their bolter. You could give one of them a heavy Alchem flamer for 20 points, but that's stupid because it's still a fleshbane weapon. I mean, you're going to be wounding on a 2 with a regular Alchem flamer, so there's no reason to pay 20 points. The Chem Master for his weapon choices can only get a power weapon or a power scythe, so you don't get access to power fists or anything like this. He does get to take a single Phosphex bomb. And the only melta bomb that you can actually take in the squad is on the sergeant equivalent, along with artificer armor. What makes these guys bad is you lose the access to certain weapons on the sergeant. you can take a Flamer support squad anyhow and exchange those all for Alchem Flamers. Destroyers with Flamer Alchem pistols, especially dual wield, are going to be better than these guys. It's a fluffy choice. I mean, if you wanted to get another unit in there with more of your Alchem Flamers, then go for it. But I really don't see any upside to these guys versus either a Flamer support squad or a Destroyer squad. And it's competing with Destroyers in the same slot. So if you really like your Flamers, my suggestion is to go with the Destroyers. I'm not complaining because we got a nice little fluffy unit here that looks good with some nice conversion potential, but it's honestly not very good. And it doesn't really do anything that you don't already have available in the list.
Yeah, I'm looking at this squad here, and if you're looking at the points, 115 here with 2 flamers basically for free here. The Mortalis destroyer squad, so basically the other destroyers are on foot. They're only, 105 base, but if you're throwing them with 2 hand flamers as you would, they're 130 because it's 5 a flamer. They're getting an extra attack. I think that extra attack really does make a difference because the flamer distance is so close. You need them to be able to have a lot of attacks on the charge or when they are charged. They come with chain swords if they're destroyers. Here you have to upgrade them to have chain swords.
Yes.
I just don't see the points value, and an extra destroyer with a double hand flamer is 17 points over 15 points. The only negative is that you can have 15 models here and only 10 in a destroyer squad, but 15 models can't use all their flamers. So again, a bit of redundance there.
Yeah, I'm totally aligned with you for all the reasons that you mentioned. There's just really no reason in my mind to take these over destroyers. I modeled some up. I'll just probably stick them into either flamer support squads or into destroyer squads or any other unit that can take flamers just for the coolness. I don't really like the unit, to be honest with you. I don't know what direction they were going with this because again, it doesn't do anything much different than what we already had.
Yeah, they are heavy. Again, means that they can't run. Destroyers aren't heavy, but I think you do want them to run.
Oh yeah, you got to get those flamers up there. So you're either paying for the transport or you're trying to run, and you can't do that with heavy. You're absolutely right.
Well, that was the elite that they put in the exemplars, but they also had some stuff in the legacies, the things they're trying to make redundant, but we still have access to.
Yeah, they stuck a couple characters into the legacies. So these guys were in the base rules before in 1.0. So this is Chrysos Morturg, the loyalist character who I love and who I have modeled, and then Marshal Durak Rask, the traitor character. We'll talk about both of them in a minute. They've got some significant changes. They're both pretty much Morturg is kind of a Praetor stat line, and for that Praetor stat line, you get actually a lot of rules, and bear with me, it's going to take a lot to kind of get through this, okay? Because he has some little tricks and stuff that you can pull off with him. So if we actually look at his rules, he comes with a lot of them. His war gear is 2 disintegrator pistols, which is gross. If you don't know what disintegrators do, this guy comes 2 of them stock. Death's Tally, which is his hand weapon, a combi flamer. So this guy's got 4 weapons, which is crazy. The Revenant's Aegis, which is his armor, frag grenades, crack grenades, rad grenades. He's T5. He's one of the few characters in the game that's T5, which is really, really nice. But he's only weapon skill, ballistic skill 5. So he's kind of like a hybrid Praetor or Centurion. And then for his special rules, he is a Psyker. He gets independent character, relentless, stubborn, bitter duty, counterattack, loyalist only, shielded by hate. And then he's got a Warlord trait, the Shadow of Death. So this is pretty crazy because he's only 175 points. The T5 is what really makes him stick out a lot. The disintegrator pistols really make him stick out a lot, and he's got rad grenades, and he's got a lot of these different things. He's really hard to kill. And the reason why he's also really hard to kill is because of his Warlord trait and his various special rules. So his Warlord trait is the Shadow of Death, and during deployment, if an enemy unit is deployed within 18 inches or of 18 inches of the unit that he's joined, and then once all infiltrations and scouts have been deployed for both friendly and enemy, Mortarg and all models in any unit he has joined may be moved up to 7 inches in any direction. So this guy triggers almost like our advanced reaction, a free 7-inch move if you get too close to him in infiltrators and scout moves, etc. Mortarg in any unit he has may join may also make a reaction of any kind normally allowed to them at no cost to the reaction allotment when reacting to an enemy unit entering play from reserves, including as part of a deep strike. This can be pretty ugly because even though he's equipped for a bit of close combat, he does have the disintegrator pistols. If you stick him with the unit, you get essentially a semi-free interceptor reaction with him. You get a free movement in any direction that you want. So now all of a sudden, if somebody's with an 18, you can use the 7-inch. You can potentially get the disintegrator pistols in range. He can pull some shenanigans that mess with people in the deployment phase, and he has a lot of shooting. He has the psychic power shielded by hate, which says he gets Aetheric Lightning as well. Shielded by hate says that basically his power is if he's reduced to 0 or otherwise removed from play as a casualty, you can immediately make a psychic check. If it is passed, then he is actually not dead, but instead he's put into reserves. So this is a little trick that several of the characters have had at different times in 1.0, 2.0. Makes him hard to kill. You take him down to 0, there's actually a really good chance that he's just going to go into reserve. If he fails or he's reserved or he is removed as a casualty, there's the potential to trigger a Perils of the Warp. But this is really cool, little fluffy little thing. His armor is a 2-up, 4-up invuln, comes with a 6-up shrouded built in like a lot of other Death Guard. His weapon, Death's Tally. It's a close combat sword. It's strength +1, AP2 on initiative, which is really good. It's not specialist weapon. It has overcharged Reaping Blow 2. What overcharge says is if you make at least one attack and it's been resolved on a roll of a 1, that model suffers a wound against only which invulnerable saves may be taken. Not too big of a downside or anything like this. What's really cool about him, he's got good close combat ability. He's got really good shooting ability. He's got, through his Warlord trait, the ability to mess with people through free reactions and free movement. And you get all of this for only 175 points. And I think that makes him a really, 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 really strong choice. He is Legacies only, so we can't forget that for some official GW events and some individual events, you may not be allowed to take Legacies. But if you can, he's a nice little choice. Other downside, he does have Bitter Duty, so you can only stick him with other units with Bitter Duty. That does affect him a little bit. Lots of AP2 at initiative, which is also really, really hard to find. So I think he's just a really, really, really good character. Very, very nice to have. But again, the Bitter Duty is going to prevent you from sticking him with a lot of units. He's going to really only go with Destroyers in most cases in a Death Guard list.
I like his weapon loadout there. There's the double-edgedness of everything he uses, from his Death's Tally with the overcharged, basically having a chance to wound him basically every time he hits something at least once there. And then the disintegrator pistols. So we were talking about those. Those are 12 inches. They're strength 5, pistol 1, AP2, instant death. Now, that's huge. The biggest downside, though, is that gets hot. And so if they do get hot, it's instant death against him at AP2. Only his invul saves there. So it's it is a double-sided one, taking the chance to shoot those off.
Yeah, he just got so much AP2, and that's really unique. I mean, that and the T5. I can see how they balanced him out a bit, where because they gave him the Bitter Duty, you can't just stick him with whatever you want. And to me, that kind of makes sense because he can be quite powerful. This is a guy that you actually might think about even running solo, right? You YOLO this guy. He's got so many different ways to kill you. I mean, he's a little distraction Carnifex on his own, and he's going to be really hard to instant kill due to the T5. Yeah, I could see that happening. But more than likely, I mean, you're going to probably stick him with the unit destroyers and let them go do their thing. And that's kill a lot of stuff really, really well with a lot of AP2.
Yeah, I do see you sticking him in some type of transport, whether it be an assault transport or just a general transport. Getting up the field with destroyers, say with the Alchem flamers, hand flamers that we were talking about, putting down a whole bunch of wounds on a unit and then eating a charge, but still having the advantage of counterattack and rad grenades.
Absolutely. I think of the two characters in Legacies as well, he's the better one. And we'll talk about the second now. That's Marshal Durak Rask. He's 165 points. He has a Centurion stat line, very standard Centurion stat line. He comes with a Volkite Serpenta Defiant, which is his close combat weapon, which is a Thunder Hammer equivalent. Artificer Armor, Nuncio Vox, Refractor Fields, Frag, Crack, and 1 Phosphex Bomb. So essentially what he is he's a Siege Breaker. He's called the Siege Master of the Death Guard Legion, but very interestingly, he's not called a Siege Breaker, which I think is a bit of a miss, because rules is written, you might have a little trouble actually using him as your mandatory Siege Breaker in a Creeping Death Rite of War, but that is what it is. For his special rules, he comes with Legion of Astartes Death Guard, independent character, Protocols of Destruction, which is his one of his abilities, Praetor only, and then he's Merciless Doctrine as his Warlord trait. So for Merciless Doctrine, if chosen as the Warlord, he has it, and what it says is any feel no pain damage mitigation rolls taken against wounds inflicted by shooting attacks from Martial Duress Rask and any unit is joined are reduced by -1 to a minimum of a 6-up. So that can be actually pretty powerful. You lose out on Sunder because he doesn't have Sunder, which normally is what Siege Breakers will give a unit. But instead, he makes it harder for people to basically use damage mitigation rolls. Okay. He does allow you to also, as part of the Warlord trait, get an additional reaction in the shooting phase as long as he's still alive. Right. So that can be nice, right? Really, really nice. Reducing damage mitigation, but smart opponents just won't take damage mitigation against this guy. He does have another special rule, Protocols of Destruction, so the controlling player model with Protocols of Destruction may activate them at the start of their own turn, or if the controlling player is not taking the first turn at the start of the battle, but before the beginning of the opposing player's first turn. Protocols basically says that any penetrating hit caused by a model with this rule and any unit they have joined gets +1 on the damage chart until the beginning of the controlling player next turn. You also get the bonus of Rapier Carriers being upgraded to have Phosphex shots. Arquiter Squadrons with Morbus Bombards can also be upgraded with Phosphex shells. I mean, this is okay. It basically says that if you do score a penetrating hit, you have a higher chance of actually blowing up whatever you hit, but it only lasts for a single turn. And it's debatable whether or not that's better than a standard Siege Breaker giving you Sunder for the entire game. I don't know the math on this, so don't quote me on that. But when I looked at this, I didn't necessarily think it was that much better. And then Defiant, which is his Thunder Hammer, Strength 8, AP2, Brutal 2, Specialist Weapon, and the only unique thing it really has about it compared to a standard Thunder Hammer is Sunder. He's not a bad character per se, but he's just not great. He's kind of meh. He's very fluffy. Rask was featured in the books. I can definitely see you taking him, but he's not like very OP or anything like that. And I think if I was going to take either character in Legacies, Traitor or Loyalist, I'd probably be taking Mortar before I would be taking Rask.
For me, he's a bit expensive for what he does over a standard Siege Breaker for this. I see him, if you are taking him, you're putting him in you're putting him with a heavy support squad to take advantage of reducing the feel no pain, so Volkite Culverin support squad that are just getting generally a lot of wounds, making you take a lot of saves, and then just, if you have the apothecaries there, making it harder to save. Just imagine going against a large 20-man tactical squad who is on a objective point with a apothecary. They're getting a 4+ mitigation save, feel no pain there. Here you're making it 5+. If they're not on the objective with Harder Legion, it's a 6+, which is just basically a shot in the dark against wounds. That's where it comes into play. But if it's worth, is it really worth 165 points?
I don't think so at all. And, I'll use my own personal example. When I run the creeping, when I pay the Siege Breaker tax, I run him bare bones. I don't give him hardly anything. And it makes him dirt cheap. I think it only makes him like 105, somewhere around that points value. All he's got is a bolt pistol, chainsword, refractor field, the 2-up artificer armor, and his standard equipment. And his entire job is to give one of my heavy support squads Sunder. That's it. Because if I'm going to pay the character tax, I'm going to make him nice and cheap. And with Wrath, he's like a bit schizophrenic, right? He's got this nice Thunder Hammer, yet you don't really necessarily always stick him into assaulting. You want him with shooting units. Like, Again, I think his rules are all over the place, and I'm not going to pay the 65 extra points or the 60 extra points when I could just take a regular siege breaker and I think be just as useful.
Yeah, but I have to agree with you there. It's nice to have, but I think there's a reason he's in the Legacies right now. I don't think it's something you're going to be taking if you're trying to min-max. But if you're trying to play something thematic with a traitor, um, he's one of two traitors you can choose.
Yes.
Well, that really rounds up our summary for the Death Guard here. We went through everything in the Black Books and also the PDFs that are available from Warhammer community. I think the summary for me, from my part, for the Death Guard is you have to pick one of the two Rite of Wars and then play to its strengths and move from there. Not vastly complicated to do, they're relatively straightforward, but they have nuances all of their own.
I completely agree with you. I think you definitely build your list around the rights of war. It doesn't mean that you can't play any of the generic rights of war, but I think both of the Death Guard ones are quite useful and quite good. It's a really straightforward Legion to play, and my simple mind loves that. You don't have too many special units. The units that you do have and their respective rules and everything else, very straightforward, easy to remember, easy to represent or remember the interactions. Um, from a modeling perspective, the Death Guard are a fantastic choice if you want to go heavy on the dirt, the grime, the weathering, and these different kinds of things. Uh, but yeah, totally agree. Play around your strengths, play around the rights of war, and it's a very, very fun, easy army to use, I think.
Well, I think that really sums up our Heresy Thursday this week. Thank you once again for tuning in if you've managed to sit through the entire podcast here. We'll be bringing you more of the Legions in army reviews in the coming weeks, so please remember to like and subscribe to make sure you get the notifications for our upcoming Heresy Thursdays. We're also releasing videos on Mondays, be those battle reports, army showcases, or other special reports that we do. But for me, Richard, thank you very much for tuning in.
And from Jason as well, as always, happy wargaming.